40 miles, 64 kilometers, across some of the most unforgiving terrain in the United Kingdom, carrying full combat equipment weighing over 35 pounds in under 8 hours. No breaks, no support vehicles, no excuses. This is the standard that every British Royal Marine must meet to earn the right to wear the coveted green beret. It is called the 30-miler on Dartmoor, and it has broken more aspiring commandos than combat ever has. When a joint training exercise brought us Marines to the United Kingdom to attempt this legendary test alongside their British counterparts, the result was so one-sided that it forced a complete reassessment of how we measure infantry excellence. Only one team finished with all members intact. The other team experienced something that would later be described in official reports as a systematic physical collapse. And before you assume this is simply about British soldiers being tougher than American soldiers, I need you to understand that what happened on that moor had almost nothing to do with individual toughness. Both forces contain extraordinarily tough individuals. What this exercise revealed was something far more profound about how different training philosophies produce dramatically different capabilities. By the end of this video, you will understand exactly what happened during those 8 brutal hours, why the outcome was so decisive, and why the lessons learned have influenced infantry training on both sides of the Atlantic ever since. Let me start by explaining what this event actually was, because the context matters enormously. The exercise was part of a bilateral training exchange designed to expose both forces to each other's selection and training standards. American and British Marines have trained together for decades. They share a name, share a heritage, and share mutual respect. But they are not the same. The Royal Marines are not an equivalent of the U.S. Marine Corps. They serve different strategic functions, have different traditions, and most critically for our story, have dramatically different training pipelines. The U.S. Marine Corps is the largest amphibious force in the world. Over 180,000 active duty personnel, a complete combined arms formation with its own aviation, armor, artillery, and logistics capabilities. Marine Corps training produces competent infantry capable of operating within this larger structure. The training is rigorous by any standard. Boot camp eliminates those who cannot meet the physical and mental demands. Infantry training adds additional capability. The result is a large force of capable soldiers who can execute the Marine Corps mission. The Royal Marines number approximately 7,000. They are not a scaled-down version of the U.S. Marine Corps. They are a different thing entirely. The Royal Marines are elite light infantry specialized in amphibious operations, Arctic warfare, mountain warfare, and expeditionary operations in austere environments. Every Royal Marine, regardless of eventual specialization, completes 30 weeks of commando training that would be considered special operations selection in most militaries. The Green Beret is not a symbol of unit membership. It is proof that the individual has passed one of the most demanding infantry training programs in the world. This difference in organizational philosophy shapes everything that follows. When American Marines arrived in the United Kingdom to participate in this exchange, they were capable infantry from a capable force, but they were not prepared for what the British considered the baseline standard. The disconnect would become devastatingly apparent within hours. The event in question was a modified version of the final commando test. British organizers designed an extended course, pushing the distance to 40 miles to create an extreme evaluation of both forces. The route crossed Dartmoor National Park in Devon, England. If you have never seen Dartmoor, it is difficult to convey how hostile this terrain actually is. Exposed moorland, minimal shelter, whether that can shift from clear to deadly fog within minutes, bogs that can swallow a man to his waist, granite outcroppings that force constant route deviation, temperature and precipitation that vary wildly regardless of season. Dartmoor has been used for military training for over 200 years, precisely because it breaks people who are not genuinely prepared. The conditions on the day of the march were typical for Dartmoor, which means they were miserable. Temperature around 8 degrees Celsius. Steady rain transitioning to driving rain. Wind gusting to 35 miles per hour. Visibility variable, at times dropping below 100 meters. The British participants considered these acceptable conditions. The American participants discovered that acceptable is a relative term. Both teams departed the start point at 0500 hours. The route had been marked, maps had been issued, and each participant carried identical loads of approximately 36 pounds plus personal weapon. Water and minimal rations were included. No resupply points existed on the route. 8 hours to cover 40 miles of the worst terrain in England. The mathematics work out to 5 miles per hour sustained pace over broken ground while carrying significant weight. For reference, a typical walking pace on flat ground without load is approximately 3 miles per hour. The required pace was nearly double that, sustained for 8 hours, over terrain specifically selected to impede movement. The first hour revealed nothing. Both teams moved well. The initial pace was aggressive but sustainable. American and British Marines mixed in the formation, moving together across the relatively accessible terrain near the start point. Observers noted good spirits and apparent physical capability across both groups. If you stopped the exercise at the 1-hour mark, you would see no meaningful difference between the forces. Hour 2 is when the terrain began to assert itself. The route entered the high moor. Ground conditions deteriorated from challenging to brutal, ankle-turning rocks hidden beneath heather, boggy sections requiring careful navigation to avoid entrapment, steep ascents and descents that taxed quadriceps and calves alike. The pace that had seemed sustainable in Hour 1 began to feel aggressive in Hour 2. Here is where the first significant difference emerged. The Royal Marines adjusted their pace almost imperceptibly, not slower in any way that would suggest weakness, but more efficient, more sustainable. Their foot placement became more precise, their breathing more rhythmic. They had done this before. Not this specific march, but this type of effort. Their bodies and minds had been calibrated through 30 weeks of training to find the sustainable pace for any given terrain. They were not racing, they were covering ground in the most efficient manner possible. The American Marines maintained their initial pace. This was not arrogance. This was training. Marine Corps doctrine emphasizes aggressive tempo. When you establish a pace, you maintain it or increase it. Slowing is a psychological concession that leads to further slowing. This philosophy works extremely well in many contexts. In an 8-hour death march across Dartmoor, it would prove catastrophic. By Hour 3, the groups had begun to separate. Not dramatically. The British were perhaps 200 meters ahead, but the pattern was established. The gap would only grow. If you are finding this analysis valuable and want to understand what truly separates elite forces from capable forces, subscribe right now. Next week, I am releasing a video on why different NATO forces have developed completely opposite approaches to physical selection. And the results when these philosophies collided will challenge everything you think you know about military fitness. But right now, let me tell you what happened in Hour 4, because this is when the American team began to experience what would later be described as systematic physical collapse. Hour 4 saw the first American casualty. The term casualty in this context means someone who could not continue. A Marine NCO experienced severe cramping in both legs and could not maintain pace. He attempted to push through. The cramping worsened. Eventually, he could not walk. He was marked as it did not finish and left at a checkpoint for later collection. This first casualty was not surprising. Any endurance event produces casualties. The British had experienced similar casualties in previous iterations of this march. What distinguished this event was the cascade that followed. By Hour 5, 3 more American Marines had fallen out. 2 with cramping severe enough to prevent movement. 1 with a rolled ankle that, while not incapacitating under normal circumstances, could not be managed while maintaining the required pace. The American team was now down for members from their starting strength. The British team had lost 1 member to a knee injury unrelated to conditioning. They were otherwise intact and moving steadily. Let me pause here to explain what was happening physiologically, because understanding the mechanics reveals why training philosophy determined outcomes. Long-distance loaded movement is a specific physical skill that requires specific physical preparation. It is not sufficient to be generally fit. It is not sufficient to be strong. It is not sufficient to be a capable runner or a capable weightlifter. The human body must be specifically conditioned to carry load over distance without breaking down. This conditioning involves muscular adaptation, cardiovascular development, joint preparation, and perhaps most importantly, neurological patterning that enables efficient movement mechanics under load. Royal Marine training includes loaded marches from the earliest weeks. The distances increase progressively. The loads increase progressively. The terrain difficulty increases progressively. By the time a recruit attempts the final 30-miler, he has already completed dozens of loaded marches of increasing difficulty. His body has adapted. His muscles have strengthened in the specific patterns required. His joints have conditioned. His movement mechanics have been refined through repetition. The 30-miler is not a shock to his system. It is the culmination of a progressive process. American Marine Corps training includes loaded movement, but the emphasis and progression differ substantially. Boot camp includes conditioning hikes, but these are shorter and with lighter loads than British equivalents. Infantry training adds additional ruck marching, but again, with less volume and less progression than British training. The American Marines who arrived at Dartmoor were fit by any reasonable standard. They could run, they could lift, they could conduct infantry operations. They had not specifically prepared for what the British considered the minimum standard. This preparation gap manifested in Hour 4 and accelerated through Hours 5, 6, and 7. American casualties accumulated. The British maintained their formation. By Hour 6, the American team had lost 8 members to various forms of physical failure. Cramping, blisters so severe that continued movement was impossible. Joint pain indicating potential injury. Exhaustion profound enough to create safety concerns. Each casualty was individually explicable. Collectively, they represented a systematic failure of physical preparation. The British team remained largely intact. They had lost the 1 member with the knee injury. Another was struggling with blisters but continuing. All others were moving steadily toward the objective. Observers later noted a difference in how the two forces managed suffering. The American Marines who were struggling attempted to push through with willpower. They gritted their teeth. They refused to acknowledge pain. They drew on the mental toughness that Marine Corps training develops. And when their bodies failed, regardless of their mental state, they experienced that failure as personal defeat. The British approach to managing suffering was different in subtle but important ways. They acknowledged the pain. They did not pretend they were comfortable. But they also did not treat the pain as something to be overcome through willpower alone. They treated it as information. They adjusted their movement mechanics. They shifted their pack weight. They modified their foot placement to reduce impact on blistering areas. They managed the suffering rather than simply enduring it. This difference reflects deeper training philosophy. American military culture emphasizes mental toughness as the solution to physical challenges. Push through the pain, refuse to quit, mind over matter. This approach builds extraordinary mental resilience that has value in many contexts, but it can also prevent adaptive responses that could maintain performance without breakdown. British Commando training emphasizes what might be called intelligent suffering. Yes, you must endure pain. Yes, you must not quit, but you must also manage your physical condition tactically. Adjust pace when necessary. Modify technique to prevent injury. Recognize the difference between pain that can be endured and pain that signals imminent breakdown. The goal is not to prove how much you can suffer. The goal is to complete the mission. By hour 7, the outcome was determined. The British team was within striking distance of the finish, with all but one member still moving. The American team had lost half their starting strength, and the survivors were struggling to maintain any pace at all. The final hour was simply confirmation of what the previous 7 hours had established. The British team crossed the finish line with their formation intact. All members who were still moving at hour 7 completed the march within the time standard. The single casualty from the knee injury was unfortunate, but not indicative of any systemic failure. The American team finished with half their starting strength. Those who completed the march did so with enormous effort and genuine courage. Their performance was individually impressive, but collectively, the result was devastating. A 50% casualty rate in a physical assessment represented a failure that could not be explained away or minimized. The after-action analysis was candid. American officers acknowledged that their Marines had not been prepared for this specific challenge. British officers noted that the challenge was simply their standard assessment that every Royal Marine must pass. There was no gloating from the British side. There was genuine respect for the American Marines who had attempted a task they were not specifically prepared for. But there was also recognition that the result revealed something important about different training approaches. Let me now explain why this matters beyond the immediate context of one training exercise. The 40-mile march was a test of a specific capability. That capability, the ability to move long distances over difficult terrain while carrying combat equipment, is one of the fundamental requirements of infantry operations. Technology has changed many aspects of warfare. This fundamental has not changed. Infantry must be able to move to the objective under their own power. If they cannot move, they cannot fight. If they cannot move far, they cannot respond to fluid tactical situations. If they cannot move fast, they cannot concentrate force when opportunities arise. The British Royal Marines build their entire training philosophy around this fundamental. Everything serves the ability to move, fight, and survive in the most demanding conditions. The 30-week Commando course is designed specifically to produce operators who can execute this capability at the highest level. The 30-miler is not an arbitrary challenge. It is validation that the operator can move when movement is essential. American Marine Corps training serves a different purpose. The corps must produce large numbers of capable infantry to fill a large organizational structure. The training must be achievable by the numbers required. The standards must be high enough to ensure capability, but not so high that they prevent adequate force generation. This is a rational response to strategic requirements. The United States needs a large Marine force. That need constrains how selective training can be. The collision between these two philosophies on Dartmoor revealed the trade-offs inherent in each approach. The British produce fewer, more specialized infantry at higher individual capability. The Americans produce more versatile infantry at lower individual capability for this specific skill. Neither approach is wrong. Both serve legitimate strategic purposes. But when you pit them against each other in a specific test, one will outperform the other. What makes this comparison valuable is not determining which approach is superior. That question has no answer without specifying context. What makes it valuable is understanding what different approaches produce and what they sacrifice. The American Marines who participated in this exercise returned to their units with knowledge they could not have obtained otherwise. They understood, through direct experience, what sustained loaded movement at the highest level looks like. They understood where their own capabilities fell short. Some of them integrated lessons learned into their personal training. Some advocated for institutional changes to Marine Corps physical training. The experience was valuable precisely because it was humbling. The British learned less that was new, since the Americans had essentially validated British training rather than challenging it, but they gained appreciation for the scale of American military capability and the different challenges the Corps faces in preparing large numbers of infantry. The mutual understanding served alliance interests even when the immediate result favored one side. The broader implications for military training have been debated extensively since this exercise and others like it. Should the U.S. Marine Corps adopt British-style loaded march progressions? Should they extend training timelines to develop specific capabilities more fully? Should they accept smaller numbers in exchange for higher individual capability? There are no easy answers to these questions. The Marine Corps serves specific strategic functions that require specific force structure. Changes that would increase individual capability might reduce overall capability by limiting numbers. The optimal answer depends on what missions you anticipate and what resources you have available. What can be said is that awareness of these trade-offs has increased. The U.S. Marine Corps has examined its physical training programs with renewed attention to specific capability development. The British have examined whether their approach could scale if larger forces were required. Both have learned from the comparison. Let me share what participants from both sides said about this experience because their perspectives illuminate what numbers alone cannot capture. An American Marine Corps staff sergeant who completed the march despite severe blistering told me, "That was the hardest thing I have ever done in my life. Harder than boot camp, harder than any combat experience, and I finished in the bottom third of the guys who actually finished. The Brits who completed it looked like they could have kept going. That was eye-opening. We think we are tough, but that specific kind of tough, they have more of it." A British Royal Marine corporal who participated offered a different perspective. He said, "We did not think of it as a competition. It was just the standard. Every one of us had completed the 30-miler to earn our beret. This was 40. So it was harder, but it was the same type of effort we had trained for. We did not know if the Americans would find it easy or hard. We just did what we always do. When they started falling out, we felt bad for them. They were clearly giving everything they had, but their training had not prepared them specifically for this." These two perspectives capture something important. The Americans experienced the event as an extraordinary challenge that pushed them beyond their preparation. The British experienced it as an extension of their standard training that required effort but was within their capability. The same event produced completely different subjective experiences based on preparation. This difference in experience has psychological implications that extend beyond physical capability. A force that regularly operates at the edge of their capability develops different psychology than a force that regularly operates within their capability. The Royal Marines expect to complete difficult loaded marches because they have completed difficult loaded marches throughout their training. This expectation becomes self-reinforcing. They expect success, so they prepare for success, so they achieve success. The American Marines who participated in this exercise encountered a challenge that exceeded their experience. This does not reflect on their character or their courage. It reflects on the difference between what their training provided and what the challenge required. Let me address something that viewers might be wondering. Does this mean Royal Marines are better than us Marines? The answer is that the question is not well-formed. Better at what? Better for what purpose? Royal Marines are better at sustained loaded movement over difficult terrain. This was demonstrated conclusively. They are better at Arctic warfare, having trained extensively in Norway. They are better at mountain warfare, having specialized capabilities in this domain. They are better at operating with minimal support because their training emphasizes self-sufficiency. U.S. Marines are better at combined arms warfare, having organic aviation, armor, and artillery that Royal Marines lack. They are better at sustained large-scale operations because they have the numbers and logistics to sustain such operations. They are better at forced entry operations at scale because they can deploy more combat power more quickly to more locations. The forces serve different purposes. Comparing them as if they should be identical obscures more than it reveals. The 40-mile march tested a specific capability where British training produces superior outcomes. Other tests would produce different results. Neither force is comprehensively superior to the other. What this comparison reveals is the importance of understanding what your training produces and what it does not produce. The American Marines who arrived at Dartmoor believed they were prepared for a difficult physical challenge. They were not prepared for that specific challenge. The gap between perception and reality produced the casualties we observed. Greater self-awareness might have produced different preparation. The U.S. Marine Corps as an institution learned from this and similar experiences. Training programs have evolved. Loaded march progressions have received increased emphasis in some units. Physical training has become more specific to the demands of infantry movement. The learning was valuable because it was honest. If you found this analysis valuable, subscribe now and hit the notification bell. Next week, I am releasing an analysis of why NATO forces approach physical selection standards so differently, and the surprising results when those different standards were tested against each other. The week after that, I am examining a special operations exchange program that produced reactions even more dramatic than what I covered today. Drop your comments below. I want to hear from veterans who have participated in loaded marches with Allied forces. How did your experience compare to what I have described? Do you believe your training prepared you for the most demanding physical challenges? I read every comment, and your perspectives directly shape future content. If you learned something from this analysis, share it with someone who appreciates understanding what truly separates capable forces from elite forces. Not the Hollywood version with dramatic music and perfect heroes, but the real version with specific capabilities produced by specific training over specific timelines. Remember that excellence is not generic. You cannot be excellent at everything. The British Royal Marines have chosen to be excellent at a specific set of capabilities, and they have designed their training to produce that excellence. The U.S. Marine Corps has made different choices to serve different strategic requirements. Both are valid. Both produce valuable military capability. But when you test one specific capability, one approach will prove superior. The 40 miles across Dartmoor tested endurance under load. The British approach to developing that capability proved superior in that test. This does not mean the British approach is universally superior. It means that if sustained loaded movement is your priority, you should study how the British develop it. Until next time, remember that training produces what training emphasizes. If you want a specific capability, you must train specifically for that capability. General fitness is valuable, but not sufficient. Specific preparation for specific challenges is what separates those who finish from those who fall out. The British Commandos finished because they had specifically prepared to finish. The American Marines who fell out did not fall out because they were weak. They fell out because they had not specifically prepared for that specific challenge. That is the lesson of the 40-mile death march. That is why only one team finished. That is what every military planner and every individual seeking excellence should remember. Excellence is specific. Prepare specifically.